Hey everybody, it's Dave H., the creator of Jambones. Jambones is the open source CPaaS for conversational AI providers and communication service providers. We recently updated our hosted offering, jambonz.cloud, and I want to give you a short video, get you up and running on jambonz.cloud. So without further ado, here we go. All right, let's get you up and running on Jambones. Your starting point is the jambonz.org website, so go there. And you're going to see you can click to create a free account on jambonz.cloud. Let's go ahead and do that. That'll take us to a register page, accept the terms and conditions, and you can sign up with an email or your Google or GitHub account. I'm going to go ahead and use Google. First thing you're going to be asked is to create a subdomain. That's where you're going to route calls based on that subdomain. You can register devices to that subdomain. If I put something in that's already taken, you'll see it's got an X. It won't allow me. If I put in beachdog, it should work. Okay, so I'm going to choose beachdog.sip.jambonz.cloud. Complete the registration. Boom. That's it. 10 seconds. I've got an account on jambonz.cloud, our hosted system. Got some details on my subscription here. You can see that I'm on the free plan for a trial period of 3 weeks. I'll be limited to 5 calls at the same time, 5 concurrent calls. And I can register up to 25 devices concurrently. It tells me when the free trial will end. I can upgrade to a paid subscription if I want. I can delete account and all my data if I want to. Now we've got to do a few things to set up, and we can see our to-do list right here. Typically we'll want to add a carrier or a SIP trunk to route calls to us, and we'll want to add speech credentials from one of the vendors we support, so we can do things like text-to-speech and automatic speech recognition. Let's go ahead and do those. I'm going to add a carrier. When you add a carrier, the main thing you'll be doing, I'm going to skip down a little bit here, is add the SIP gateways. Add the IP addresses that your SIP trunking provider is going to be sending from, so that we can see and understand who the SIP provider is. Now we have some presets all ready to go. Foxbone, Telecoms Exchange, Twilio, Simwood. So I'm going to use Twilio as a preset. Now, so I select Twilio and boom, it's pretty much already configured for me. All of Twilio's IP addresses are set here. These are all the IP addresses, if you go to Twilio's site, that they could be sending calls to us from. The one I do need to change is when we send a call back to Twilio, we have to use a certain subdomain of psdn.twilio.com. I'm going to use beachdog. And I'll need to configure that on the Twilio side. Now, similarly, when we send outbound calls to Twilio, we need to do some kind of authentication. I recommend using an auth username and password that you can set up on Twilio. So I'm going to set that to beachdog, and I will make, let's see, I'll make the password, what shall I make the password? I'm going to make the password, jambones. And that's going to be good enough for Twilio. Now, in some carriers, they may require you to always be sending them SIP registers to sort of arm that trunk, to sort of activate that trunk. It's not common, but it can be a case. Twilio, we do not need to do that. These credentials we're providing will be used when we send an invite to Twilio. They will challenge with our domain, and we'll provide these credentials, and they'll let the call go through. Some other options here that, again, we don't need for Twilio. If we wanted to apply a tech prefix on outbound calls, we can do that. If the carrier supports the SIP diversion header as a way of authenticating the calling party number, we could do that. We don't need to do that, so we're basically all set. I'm going to go ahead and save the carrier. Carrier updated successfully, and I can see I've got Twilio. I can see it's active. I've got 9 inbound SIP gateways that I could accept calls from Twilio, and 1 outbound gateway. Next thing we want to do is add speech. So let's click and go ahead and add a speech service. If you look at our vendors, we got quite a long list. So we support a lot of different speech vendors. Choose the ones you want. We even support custom, which is where you can build an API and add in any speech vendor that you want. But the preset list is pretty complete here. I'm going to go with Google. I'm going to use for text-to-speech and speech-to-text, so both TTS and ASR. For Google, the way we authenticate is with a service key. So you would go to Google, create an account if you don't have one, enable the speech APIs, and then download a JSON service key, and then you put it here. You can see we've obscured the private aspects of the key. When we add a vendor, we check it immediately to see it's okay. because perhaps you didn't enable the APIs you needed to, you would get notified of that here. So I'm pretty much, boom, done. I've configured my account, just about ready to make calls. Let's go over and look at the kinds of things you need to do on the Twilio side, because I added Twilio as a carrier. So over on the Twilio side, I've got a trunk. You want to create an elastic SIP trunk. I've created a SIP trunk called jambonz.org. On the general page, there's not too much to do. Typically, you're going to want to enable SIP refer, and you want to click the box enable PSTN transfer. That's if you want to use SIP refer to transfer calls. And in a lot of call center scenarios or conversational AI, that's sort of the preferred option. So go ahead and enable that on Twilio. I'm going to skip down to origination. This is the main thing. Here you can see on Twilio, I've added an origination URI, SIP beachdog.jambonz.cloud. That corresponds to, if I go back to my Twilio vendor, or the carriers, have your carriers send calls to beachdog.sip.jambonz.cloud. Again, that's the subdomain I created when I created my account. That's a DNS record that's resolvable. If you were to try to resolve it, you'd see it's going to point to our SPCs. So that corresponds to here. I went over, did this before the call, and I created an origination URI with just that information as I was instructed on jambonz.cloud. On the termination side, you want to add a termination SIP URI. Again, this is on Twilio. You can pick anything you want, but it has to be unique, and they'll tell you if it's not. I picked beachdog.pstn.twilio.com, and again, that maps to this Outbound carrier that I configured. So that value here, beachdog.pstn.twilio.com, needs to match this value that I put in here. That allows me to complete calls through Twilio. Now we want a little data security here, because we don't want anybody who happen to know the SIP URI beachdog.pstn.twilio.com to complete calls on our account. So it's good to, and recommended, to put a credential list. So I created a credential list additionally called jambonz.cloud. If I go to look at that list, look at credential lists, and jambonz.cloud, you can see I've got a username beachdog here and a password. It doesn't show the password, but in fact the password is exactly the one that I used up here, which was jambonz.rock. So again, those two things go together. So now that I've done that, I'm able to receive calls from Twilio. And the last part is that if I go back to SIP trunking and I go back to the trunk that I created, jambonz.cloud, you want to assign some phone numbers to your trunk, some DIDs, so I can call this number. When I call this number, Twilio will look for my origination URI that I configured, and I configured it again with beachdog.sip.jambonz.cloud, my subdomain in Jambonz, and it will send the call there. So on my side, back on Jambonz, we want to add a phone number. We want to add that phone number so we know how to route it. So I've copied it in there. It's from the Twilio carrier. And I've got a set of default applications. Let's just send it to the Hello World application. So there, carrier's all set. Again, I'm going to recap this just briefly so you make sure you see everything. You've got a carrier, you've got inbound gateways, and you have the IP address or addresses or subnets, CIDRs, that they'll be sending from so that we can receive an incoming call from them and know it's that carrier. You've got an outbound. If you want to send calls through the carrier, they need to create an outbound SIP gateway. In the case of Twilio, you're going to use a subdomain of pstn.twilio.com. I chose beachdog. I needed to go over to Twilio, and in the termination URI, put that. That's how everything matches up. There's some other options here I haven't shown. On, let's say, on Outbound, I don't have to just use UDP. I could use TCP, TLS, or TLS with SRTP encryption. So a couple of choices there. We'll stick with UDP for now. Again, everything's set now, so I should be able to make a call and see it hit my platform. I'm going to make a call with my, oops, we'll come back to Outbound call route. I haven't done anything there. I'm going to make a call, and unfortunately you won't be able to hear it because I don't have the audio hooked up, but let's just make sure. Okay, actually, maybe, hopefully you did hear that. I'm not sure if I've got the audio set up. I made the call, and I verified it hit the platform. And in fact, it went to the application I wanted to do, which was Hello World. Again, when you create your account, you get 3 default applications. You're going to go out and create your own applications, but it's nice to have some out-of-the-box ones. If we look at the Hello World application, you can see we have, it's a webhook application, and we've got a webhook to call, and we've got a call status webhook. And then we make choices. We choose which vendors we want to use for this call. So I'm using Google for speech, ASR, TTS, or sorry, ASR for TTS. I'm using language, and I selected one of the voices. We've got a whole bunch of voices, including their new Neural Studio polyglot and news voices. So pretty cool. Speech recognizer, again, I chose Google because that's what I configured. And I chose English. They've got, of course, a bunch of other languages as well. Let's go back, and just for fun, let's add a couple more speech vendors. I'm going to add DeepGram. They only provide ASR, but they are really good at it. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my DeepGram API key. I recommend you to go to DeepGram and create a free account, and you will get some credits, and you'll be able to use DeepGram right away. And for fun, let's add another one. Let's also add Microsoft. And you know, the thing is, I can switch between these within a given call. So I can, let's go to, I've got a credential in East US. So I don't need to pick one vendor for a call. I can do it turn by turn in conversation. I can use different vendors. And of course, I can use different vendors for STT and TTS. I can use Google for TTS and Microsoft for STT. Again, status is okay. We've checked all those credentials. We actually hit the APIs, and we know that they're good. So I've got a choice now of 3 vendors I can use in my applications. Now, if we go, I'm going to show a few other features. If we go to recent calls, we can see that call that I just made. So let's expand it. And you can see the details of the call. We also have a PCAP of it, so let's go ahead and download a PCAP. And if we bring up the PCAP that I just downloaded, oops, bring it over into this window, you can see we get basically all of the calls. All the call traces, and I can see everything that came in from Twilio. I can see their custom headers, etc., etc. I can see that we sent it 200 OK, etc., etc. So PCAPs are quite useful for troubleshooting calls. We also have application tracing, which is kind of interesting. So we're using OpenTelemetry, and we provide a very detailed application trace. So if you're troubleshooting an individual call, you can kind of look down here in detail, see maybe where things went wrong. So for instance, we see the call come in, it's an incoming call, and then we have what are called child spans in OpenTelemetry. So lookup account details is a database lookup that we did, and it took 22 milliseconds. So a couple database lookups are done right off the beginning. That's to figure out, again, which account this is based on the carrier that's coming in, figure out which application we need to route this to based on the carrier and the phone number. We can see that those things are pretty quick. We did a webhook. Now the webhook is interesting because that's your code, that's third-party code. That was pretty quick too, so no problems there. And then we went into a verb, and we can say, now each of these spans we click on and get more detail. So I can say, yes, the duration here was whatever, 14 seconds to play that thing. I can see we did some TTS generation. If I click on that child span, I can see we used Google to generate TTS, and it took Google 473 milliseconds to generate the TTS for that prompt. So a lot of low-level detail, which can be quite useful and interesting in troubleshooting. Okay, now let's do something else. We have shown taking calls from a SIP trunk. Let's show taking calls from a SIP device. To do that, we want to go to Clients, and we want to add a SIP client. Now you can see here, we've got a SIP realm. It's the same custom domain subdomain that we created before. So this is our SIP realm. The devices will register against. It's beachdog.sip.jambonz.cloud again. So let's add a SIP client. I'm just going to say, let's go with Dave H. And for a password, let's see, what should we do? Let's just do foo bar Basil. Make sure I type that foo bar Basil. So all I've really done here is create a SIP client. I can create as many or a set of SIP credentials, really. I can create as many as I want. They're all under the domain beachdog.sip.jambonz.cloud. Now let's go back to account. When we do get a call from a SIP device, we need to specify which application to handle. Recall, we set up and specified how to route calls from a trunk, Twilio, to applications based on phone numbers. And you can think of the calls from devices as a kind of a pseudo device trunk as well. And we have to specify how do we want to route these calls from registered SIP devices. I'm going to register to a simple echo test. This is a simple app that asks you to say something, and then it transcribes it, and then it tells you the transcription, and it tells you the confidence level. So that's pretty good. So let's just do that. We're generating TTS, and we cache the TTS as a side note here for performance. But you can come in here at any point in time and see how many TTS prompts are cached. And if you wanted to, for some reason, you can clear the cache. Prompts are cached by default for 3 hours, I think. So if the same prompt is used within 3 hours, it will continue being fetched from a prompt, from cache. Let's go ahead and save that change we made to the app. So the account. So now I've got a client. Let's do a client thing. So I want beachdog.sip.jambones.org. I'm using Bria, so let's add a voice configuration for Bria. And I put that in the domain. That's the domain I'm going to register with. And Dave H was my username. I don't need to do authorization. And my password was foo bar Basil. I'm sure I typed that. And we're done. So now I've got a SIP client. With Bria, it's kind of a two-step thing. You go to the website and then you fire up their client and it retrieves the info from the website. And you can see the count is enabled, the phone is ready. I'm going to go ahead and make a call. Or actually, before I make a call, let's do something else. I want to show you a different feature. Let's go back to our account. Let's enable call recording. This is kind of a neat feature. So we're going to record calls, and I have a choice of MP3 or WAV. I'm going to choose MP3 because the files will be a little smaller. These recordings are not stored on jambonz.cloud. They're not stored in our cloud system. They're stored in your cloud storage, and this is great for privacy reasons. You really don't want recordings of your calls with all the private information that could be in them, like credit card numbers, social security numbers, on some third-party server that you have an arm's length relationship with. You want them under lock and key in your network. And this is how we do it. So you can say, I want to, in my case, I'm going to put them into my personal AS3 account. They'll never be stored on jambonz.cloud. So I have created in my personal S3 account, or AWS account, I created a bucket. It's actually in US East. And I created an access key and secret access key that only have rights, that have limited rights, really. They can only read and write to this bucket. They can't do things like create EC2 instances. You can optionally add tags if you want. Let me just add a tag, and I'll say a tag for the system that it came from, jambonz.cloud, let's say. I can do a test just to make sure that everything's valid. I can see it's valid. I can add calls. I can record all the calls on my account, or I can also do it by application. So for instance, if I have some testing I want to do with a customer before they go live, and I want to record some of their test calls because for instance, we really want to dig down into trying out some different speech recognition vendors for their app and see how they compare. I can record just the calls for their test account or for their test application. And their production calls maybe we don't want to record for privacy reasons. So this is pretty useful. Or you may want to record all the calls, and that's what I'm going to do at this point. So now I've saved that. Account's updated. Now I want to go back and make a test call to the Echo app. Let's go ahead and do that. I've routed all the calls from registered devices to that, as you remember, so it doesn't particularly matter what I dial. So let's do this.
Please say something and we will echo it back to you.
What time is the meeting tomorrow?
You said, "What time is the meeting tomorrow?" The confidence score was 0.99. The speech service was provided by Google. Say something else.
I think I'm going to be late to the meeting. Could you tell Paul to cover for me?
You said, "I think I'm going to be late to the meeting. Could you tell Paul cover for me?" The confidence score was 0.97. The speech service was provided by Google. Say something.
Okay. That's pretty cool. Just for fun, let's go to the simple echo test, which is using currently Google for speech recognition, and let's try DeepGram. And well, let's change this too. Let's go to Microsoft and use Christopher.
Please say something and we will echo it back to you.
What time is the meeting tomorrow?
You said, "What time is the meeting tomorrow?" The confidence score was 1.00. The speech service was provided by DeepGram. Say something else.
I'm afraid I'm going to be late to the meeting. Could you ask Paul to
You
cover
said,
for me?
"I'm afraid I'm going to be late to the meeting." The confidence score was 1.00. The speech service was provided by DeepGram.
Okay, interesting. So very good recognition from DeepGram, but you can see on the second recognition, it kind of returned me a fragment of the speech. That's okay because DeepGram provides a really neat feature where you can control that. It's called endpointing. Endpointing has to do with how much silence this recognizer will receive before it determines that it's received a full utterance. So the default endpointing is pretty quick, which makes it snappy for conversational IVR and short commands. In something like this, we can tweak it through our application because we support that DeepGram feature, and we could extend it because we know we're looking for a longer response. So I won't do that in this demo, but reach out to us if you want to play with the endpointing. So, made a couple of calls. Let's go look at these calls. Because again, back to the recording feature, they've been recorded. They've been shipped up to my AWS S3 account. But if I look here, I can see that now I can see them right in, I can see the recordings right in the portal. Let's listen to a little bit of one.
Please say something and we will echo it back to you.
What time is the meeting tomorrow?
You said, "What time is the meeting tomorrow?" The confidence score was 0.99. The speech service was provided by Google. Say something else.
I think I'm going to be late to the meeting. Could you tell Paul to cover for me?
You said, "I think I'm going to be late to the meeting. Could you tell Paul cover for me?" The confidence score was 0.97. The speech service was provided by Google. Say something.
Okay, so I can listen to them right here. I can download them as well. If I download that MP3 and bring it up, I can see, I can play it again in Audacity.
Please say something and we will echo.
The neat thing is by downloading, I can take snippets of it and I can test it out then offline in different recognizers and do things like that. So for detailed, really detailed troubleshooting, this can be useful. Now here's a really neat thing. If I click Overlay SDT and TTS Event, I can see on the caller line exactly when we were listening for speech. So for instance, these beige areas, regions, these were times on the timeline, a duration on the timeline where we were listening and streaming audio to the recognizer. And so I can, of course, play it and listen to it, but if I click on that, I can then see what the result was. Right on the timeline, I can listen to what was said, and then at the same time I can see what was returned from the transcript. I can also get a sense of the latency. Here you can see I stopped talking about here, and it took about a second or a little more before I got the result back from Google. If we go, for instance, to our second call where we had that very short one return, you can see here, see there's a little pause here, and that's what kicked DeepGram into returning the transcript. And that is what, again, we can configure. We can tune that with DeepGram. But it's very good to see be able to see the different latency associated with different recognizers. So when you're trying out a new recognizer, you can come in here, you can listen exactly, you can hear the audio, and then you can see the transcript. You can visually see the latency of the transcriber. So that all is pretty cool. Okay, that's about it. This is, to get you up and running on Jambones. One feature we didn't look at that I'll mention just briefly is outbound call routing. This is a feature many people won't need. If you only have one carrier, then all your outbound calls will go out through that carrier when you are sending a call to a type of phone. You can always, of course, send outbound calls to registered SIP devices. You can always send them also to a SIP URI by specifying that. But when you say you want to call a number and you want to choose from one of your carriers, this is one of the options you have to create least cost routing. So you are able to create and match different outbound dialing patterns. So if you wanted to say everything going to the UK, it starts with a 44, I want to send out through Simwood, for instance, but everything else I want to send out through Twilio. That's the kind of thing you can do here. All right, so that's up and running on jambonz.cloud. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at support@jambonz.org, or even better, hit us up on Slack, and you can join our Slack community by going to joinslack.tractio.org. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.